The email arrived at 4:47 p.m. on a Thursday, dressed in corporate language so sterile it could have disinfected a hospital ward. Ethan Cole read it 3 times, each pass making the words sharper, more real. Restructuring, market conditions, adjusted compensation package. The phrases danced around the truth like lawyers around a loophole, but the number at the bottom was brutally honest: $45,000 annually, effective immediately. He sat in his cubicle on the 7th floor of Meridian Technologies, surrounded by the artifacts of 7 years of loyalty. A coffee mug from the 2019 team-building retreat, a small succulent his ex-girlfriend had given him, somehow still alive despite his neglect. 3 framed certificates recognizing his contributions to projects that had generated millions in revenue. The certificates suddenly felt like participation trophies given to a child who'd lost every game. Ethan's hands trembled as he forwarded the email to his personal account. $75,000. That's what they just erased from his future with a few paragraphs of sanitized text. He'd been making $120,000, not extravagant by San Francisco standards, but enough to cover his rent, student loans, and the occasional weekend escape to clear his head. Now he was staring at a figure that wouldn't even cover his basic expenses. The office hummed with its usual Thursday afternoon energy. Keyboards clattered. Someone laughed at a joke in the break room. The coffee machine gurgled through another pot of the burnt-tasting brew that everyone complained about but kept drinking. Life continued its normal rhythm while Ethan's world tilted sideways. Marcus Chen appeared at the edge of his cubicle, concern etched across his face. Marcus worked in product development, 2 floors down, but they'd become friends during late nights debugging code and sharing takeout containers of pad thai. He was shorter than Ethan, with wire-rimmed glasses that constantly slid down his nose and a collection of vintage band t-shirts that probably violated the business casual dress code. "Dude, I just heard," Marcus said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "Thompson's making rounds. Half the engineering team got the same email." Ethan's stomach dropped. It wasn't just him. That somehow made it worse. A systematic gutting of people who'd built this company's technical infrastructure. How bad is it? Sarah and QA, both Davids from backend, Jenkins from security. Marcus counted them off on his fingers. All senior people, all getting slashed to basically junior-level pay. While keeping the senior workload, I'm guessing. Of course, Marcus pulled up a chair from a neighboring cubicle. Thompson sent out a memo this morning, said we need to optimize operational efficiency before the quarterly earnings call. Translation, make the profit margins look sexy for investors by cutting payroll costs. Ethan opened his desk drawer and pulled out a flash drive, one of the old-fashioned ones he'd been meaning to replace with cloud storage but never got around to. On it were his personal copies of every project he'd worked on, every line of code he'd written, every system architecture diagram he'd designed. 7 years of intellectual labor, backed up and color-coded. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked, recognizing the look on his friend's face. It was the same expression Ethan got when solving a particularly thorny technical problem: focused, calculating, slightly dangerous. "I'm thinking about the StreamCore project," Ethan said slowly. "Remember that?" Marcus's eyes widened. "The data compression algorithm you developed? That's like the backbone of their entire cloud service now." "Exactly." Ethan pulled up a folder on his computer, navigating through years of archived emails and documentation. "I built that on my own time, nights, weekends, using my own equipment. I brought it to Meridian as a proof of concept. They loved it, implemented it, and it's now processing about 40% of their enterprise client data." "But you signed all the IP over to them, right? Standard employment contract stuff?" Ethan's smile was thin, almost predatory. "I signed over the implementation, the core algorithm, the mathematical model, the optimization protocols. Those were developed before I officially pitched it to the company. I kept the original research documentation, time-stamped and notarized, just in case I ever wanted to publish a paper on it." The implications hung in the air between them. Marcus whistled low. "You're saying you own the foundational work." "I'm saying that what Meridian Technologies is currently using might be built on a foundation they don't fully own." Ethan closed the laptop with a soft click. I need to talk to a lawyer. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Ethan went through the motions of his work, responding to emails, attending a status meeting where everyone pretended that half the team wasn't being financially dismantled, but his mind was elsewhere, calculating, planning, remembering. He thought about the nights he'd spent in his apartment, whiteboard covered with equations, testing and retesting the compression model. He'd been obsessed with solving a problem that had plagued the industry for years: how to efficiently compress and stream data without quality loss while keeping processing costs low. The solution had come to him at 3 in the morning after a week of failures, an elegant mathematical approach that was both simple and revolutionary. He'd brought it to Meridian because he was excited, because he believed in the team, because he thought they'd appreciate the innovation. And they had. By integrating it into their product line, generating massive revenue, and now thanking him by cutting his salary to barely livable levels. At 6 p.m., the office began to empty. Ethan packed his laptop bag with deliberate care, making sure he had every personal backup, every piece of documentation he might need. Sarah Martinez from QA stopped by his desk, her eyes red from crying. "Did you get the email?" she asked, though the answer was obvious. "Yeah," Ethan stood, slinging his bag over his shoulder. "You?" $42,000. I've been here 9 years, Ethan. 9 years. I have 2 kids in daycare. The mortgage on my house is more than I'll be taking home after taxes now." Her voice cracked. "How is this legal?" "It's legal because we're at-will employees in a state that heavily favors employers," Ethan said. "They can cut our pay to minimum wage if they want, as long as it doesn't violate our contracts. And our contracts have clauses that allow for compensation adjustments based on business needs. So we're just screwed." "Maybe." Ethan paused, choosing his words carefully. "Or maybe some of us have options they didn't consider." He left Sarah with that cryptic statement and headed for the elevator. The building's lobby was all glass and steel, designed to project success and innovation. A massive screen displayed the company's stock price, up 3% for the day. Apparently, word of the cost-cutting measures had leaked early, and investors loved it. Ethan stepped out into the cool San Francisco evening. The city sprawled before him, a maze of hills and lights and endless ambition. Somewhere in that maze was an attorney who specialized in intellectual property law. He pulled out his phone and started searching. The law office of Rebecca Ortiz occupied the 14th floor of a building in the financial district that smelled like expensive cologne and quiet money. Ethan had found her through a combination of Google reviews and a referral from a former colleague who'd fought a patent dispute with a previous employer. "She's thorough," his contact had said, "and she doesn't back down." Ethan needed someone who didn't back down. Rebecca was in her mid-40s, with silver streaks in her dark hair and the kind of focused intensity that made you sit up straighter in your chair. Her office was lined with law books and framed case victories, each one a story of intellectual property battles won and lost. She listened to Ethan's story without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad with handwriting so small it looked like code. When he finished, she leaned back in her leather chair and studied him. "Tell me about the timeline again. When exactly did you develop the core algorithm?" Ethan pulled out his laptop and opened a folder he'd organized the night before. "I started working on the compression model in January 2019. I was still employed at Meridian, but this was entirely separate from my work responsibilities. I used my personal equipment, my own time, working from my apartment. I kept development logs, time-stamped commits to a private repository, even notarized the mathematical proofs at a UPS store." He turned the screen to show her. Hundreds of files, all dated and documented, showing the evolution of his work from rough concept to refined algorithm. Rebecca put on reading glasses and leaned forward, scrolling through the evidence with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen thousands of similar documents. And when did you present this to Meridian? May 2019. I'd gotten it to a place where I could demonstrate a working prototype. I thought it would be valuable for the company, maybe get me a bonus or a promotion. I presented it in a meeting with my direct supervisor and 2 executives from the product development team. What happened then? They loved it, asked if I could integrate it into our existing streaming platform. I said yes, spent the next 6 months doing the implementation work. That part was definitely on company time, using company resources. By December 2019, StreamCore was live, and it's been the foundation of their enterprise cloud service ever since. Rebecca made more notes. Did you sign anything when you presented the initial algorithm? Any transfer of ownership documents? No, just the standard employment IP clause that says anything I develop in the course of employment belongs to the company. But the core algorithm wasn't developed in the course of employment. It was developed before I ever mentioned it to them, on my own time as independent research.
A slow smile spread across Rebecca's face, the smile of a lawyer who just found a crack in the opposition's armor. This is interesting, very interesting. Meridian Technologies has built a significant portion of their business model on technology that you may have legitimate claim to. How much revenue do you estimate StreamCore generates for them? Ethan had done the math. He'd spent hours analyzing quarterly reports, earnings calls, client contracts that were publicly available through industry publications. Based on their enterprise service pricing and the number of clients using StreamCore, I'd estimate between 15 and 20 million annually, and it's growing. They've been pitching it to new clients as their flagship technology. 20 million a year built on your intellectual property. Rebecca set down her pen. Here's what I need you to understand, Ethan. This isn't going to be quick, and it isn't going to be easy. If we pursue this, Meridian will fight back hard. They have in-house counsel and the resources to drag this out. You're going to face pressure, intimidation, maybe retaliation disguised as legitimate business decisions. Are you prepared for that? Ethan thought about the email that had cut his salary by 62%. He thought about Sarah Martinez with her 2 kids and her underwater mortgage. He thought about Marcus and the others who'd been systematically undervalued and discarded. He thought about 7 years of late nights and loyalty and trust that had been rewarded with a form letter and corporate doublespeak. They already retaliated, he said quietly. They just didn't know I had ammunition to fire back. Rebecca nodded, impressed. Then let's build your case. I'm going to need every piece of documentation you have, development logs, emails, drafts, prototypes, anything that shows the timeline and your independent creation of this technology. I'll also need a detailed technical breakdown of the difference between your original algorithm and the implementation Meridian is currently using. Can you provide that? I can do better than that. I can show you that their implementation is just a wrapper around my core work. Strip away the company branding and the interface they built, and it's my algorithm doing all the heavy lifting. Perfect. Rebecca stood, extending her hand. Here's what happens next. I'm going to draft a letter to Meridian's legal department outlining your claim and requesting negotiation for a licensing agreement. We're not going in aggressively. We're going in professionally. We're saying that you've identified an intellectual property issue that needs to be resolved, and you're willing to work with them to find a fair solution. And if they refuse, then we file a lawsuit and prepare for a discovery. But companies usually prefer to settle these things quietly, especially when there's legitimate exposure. Bad publicity, potential impact on stock price, the risk that a court might rule against them and set precedent. These are powerful motivators. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you're enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Ethan shook her hand, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and terror. He was stepping off a cliff, trusting that the parachute of documentation and legal theory would actually open. What's your fee structure? For a case like this, contingency. 35% of whatever we recover plus costs. If we don't win, you don't pay. But Ethan, I think we're going to win." He left the office feeling lighter than he had in days. The evening had turned foggy, the way San Francisco evenings do, wrapping the city in a gray blanket that softened the edges of buildings and made the streetlights glow like distant moons. Ethan walked instead of taking the bus, needing the movement, the time to think. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Coffee tomorrow? Need to talk." Ethan replied, "Yeah, I have some news." That night, in his small apartment with its view of a brick wall and a slice of sky, he worked. He compiled every piece of evidence, organized it into a timeline that would make sense to lawyers and judges who didn't understand code. He wrote a technical explanation of his algorithm in language that was clear and accessible, stripping away the jargon without dumbing down the innovation. Around midnight, he took a break and stood by his window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, executives at Meridian Technologies were sleeping peacefully, unaware that the foundation they'd built their profits on was about to shift beneath them. Ethan allowed himself a small, grim smile. They'd made a calculation when they cut his salary. They weighed the cost of keeping him satisfied against the money they'd save by devaluing him, and they'd decided he wasn't worth the investment. They'd made a very expensive mistake. Rebecca's letter arrived at Meridian Technologies on a Monday morning, delivered by courier to the legal department with all the formal weight of a declaration of war wrapped in polite legal language. Ethan knew because Marcus texted him at 10:15 a.m. with a single word: chaos. The letter, as Rebecca had explained, was carefully worded. It didn't complain. It wasn't threatening. It simply outlined Ethan's claim to the core algorithm underlying StreamCore, presented the timeline of development, and requested a meeting to discuss a fair and equitable licensing arrangement that would benefit both parties. The response was immediate and exactly what Rebecca had predicted. By noon, Ethan received a call from Douglas Thompson, the CFO who'd signed off on the salary cuts. His voice was professionally neutral, the way a snake might sound if it could talk. "Ethan, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We should talk." "I'm represented by counsel," Ethan said calmly. "All communication should go through my attorney, Rebecca Ortiz. You should have her contact information from the letter." "There's no need to make this adversarial. You're still part of the Meridian family. The family that just cut my salary by 62%? A pause. Thompson's neutrality cracked slightly, revealing irritation underneath. "That was a business decision based on market conditions, but let's not conflate separate issues. This claim about intellectual property, it's not going to hold up, Ethan. You signed an employment agreement. Everything you created while working here belongs to the company. Everything I created while working for you belongs to the company," Ethan corrected. "My attorney and I have extensive documentation showing that the core StreamCore algorithm was developed on my own time using my own resources before I ever presented it to Meridian. The implementation work I did after, sure, that's yours, but the foundation, that's mine." Another pause, longer this time. Ethan could almost hear the mental calculations happening on the other end of the line. This is a serious accusation. It's a serious claim, supported by serious evidence. And it's not an accusation. It's a request for fair compensation for the use of my intellectual property. My attorney has suggested a licensing arrangement. I think that's more than reasonable. I'll have our legal team review this and get back to you. Thompson's voice had gone cold, professional mask fully back in place. "But Ethan, I'd strongly advise you to reconsider this course of action. These things can get ugly, and they rarely end well for the individual going up against a company." "Is that a threat?" "It's advice, friendly advice." The call ended. Ethan sat in his apartment, heart pounding, wondering if he'd just made the bravest or stupidest decision of his life. The next day, he was summoned to HR. Not asked, summoned
via an email with all the warmth of a tax audit notice. Ethan forwarded it to Rebecca, who called him within 5 minutes. "Don't go alone," she said. "I'll meet you there. And don't sign anything, don't agree to anything, and for God's sake, don't let them record the meeting without my presence." The HR office was on the 3rd floor, a space designed to look friendly and approachable, with its soft lighting and inspirational posters about teamwork. Behind a desk sat Patricia Huang, head of human resources, with a forced smile and a folder thick with documents. Douglas Thompson was there too, sitting in the corner like a corporate specter. Rebecca arrived before they could start, introducing herself with the kind of polite authority that immediately changed the room's dynamic. She was wearing a navy suit and carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it had seen 1,000 negotiations. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Patricia began, her smile never wavering. "We wanted to discuss Ethan's recent communications with the company and see if we can resolve this matter amicably." "My client is certainly interested in an amicable resolution," Rebecca said, settling into a chair beside Ethan. "That's why we proposed a licensing arrangement rather than immediately filing suit." Thompson leaned forward. "Let's be clear about something. Ethan's claim has no merit. The employment agreement he signed is ironclad. Any work product created during his tenure belongs to Meridian Technologies." The operative phrase being, "during his tenure," Rebecca countered smoothly. The core algorithm in question was created prior to its disclosure to the company, on Mr. Cole's personal time using his personal resources. We have time-stamped documentation, notarized proofs, independent version control logs, which could easily be fabricated, Thompson interrupted. Rebecca's smile was sharp as a knife. "Are you accusing my client of fraud, Mr. Thompson? Because that's a serious allegation that you might want to reconsider making without evidence." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Patricia jumped in, trying to mediate. "I think what Douglas means is that these matters often come down to interpretation. The reality is that Ethan was employed by Meridian when he presented the algorithm, when he developed it into a working product, and when it was integrated into our systems. From our perspective, that makes it company property." "And from our perspective," Rebecca said, pulling documents from her briefcase, "Mr. Cole created original research that he then allowed Meridian to implement. At no point did he transfer ownership of the underlying intellectual property. Here's a copy of the original algorithm documentation, dated January 2019. Here's the notarization. Here's the GitHub commit history from Mr. Cole's personal repository. And here," she placed another document on the table, "is the timeline showing when he first mentioned this work to Meridian, which was 4 months after the core development was complete." Ethan watched the two executives exchange glances. This wasn't going the way they'd planned. "What exactly are you asking for?" Thompson said finally. Rebecca didn't miss a beat. "A licensing agreement. Meridian can continue using the algorithm that's now integral to StreamCore, but they'll pay Mr. Cole a fair royalty for its use. We're proposing 5% of StreamCore-related revenue, with quarterly audits to ensure accuracy." Thompson actually laughed. 5%? StreamCore generates millions. You're asking for hundreds of thousands of dollars annually? "I'm asking for fair compensation for technology that generates millions," Rebecca corrected. "Without Mr. Cole's algorithm, StreamCore doesn't exist. Your own marketing materials describe it as revolutionary compression technology. That revolution was Mr. Cole's creation, and he deserves to be compensated for it." "This is extortion," Thompson said flatly. "No, this is intellectual property law." Rebecca's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "And if you'd prefer to have this conversation in court, with all the associated publicity and discovery processes, we're prepared for that. But I suspect That's not in Meridian's best interest, particularly with quarterly earnings approaching and investors already nervous about tech sector valuations. The meeting ended without resolution, but Ethan could see the shift. They were worried. They were actually worried. Over the next 2 weeks, the corporate machinery ground into motion. Meridian's legal team dug into Ethan's claims, looking for weaknesses, trying to find evidence that the algorithm had been developed using company resources or time. They combed through his computer logs, email history, even his building security access records, trying to prove he'd been in the office during development periods. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Ethan had been meticulous, almost obsessively so, about keeping his personal research separate from his work obligations. Marcus kept Ethan updated on the internal chaos. "They're freaking out," he reported over coffee at their usual spot, a cafe near the office where they'd spent countless lunch breaks. Legal brought in outside counsel. Thompson has been in closed-door meetings all week. And get this, they're doing an audit of every major technology implementation to see if there are any other potential IP issues. "They should have thought about that before cutting everyone's salary," Ethan said, sipping his Americano. "Dude, you're a legend in the office. Everyone knows what you're doing. Sarah told me people are actually going back and reviewing their own work, seeing if they have any similar claims." Ethan hadn't expected to become a symbol, but he realized that's exactly what had happened. By standing up to the company, by refusing to accept being devalued, he'd given hope to everyone else who felt powerless. It was gratifying and terrifying in equal measure. The breakthrough came on a Thursday afternoon. Rebecca called with the news. "They want to negotiate." "Seriously?" "Seriously. Their outside counsel did an analysis and concluded that we have a strong case. They don't want this going to court, especially not right before their earnings call. They're proposing a settlement." Ethan's heart raced. What kind of settlement? "They're offering $200,000, one-time payment, in exchange for you signing over all rights to the algorithm and agreeing to a non-disclosure agreement about the settlement terms." That's it? $200,000 for technology that's making them millions every year? "I'm asking for fair compensation for technology that generates millions," Rebecca corrected. "Without Mr. Cole's algorithm, StreamCore doesn't exist. Your own marketing materials describe it as revolutionary compression technology. That revolution was Mr. Cole's creation, and he deserves to be compensated for it." The waiting was worse than the confrontation. Ethan went through his days in a strange limbo, still technically employed by Meridian at his reduced salary, but now negotiating as if he were an outside vendor. He worked on side projects, updated his resume, and tried not to think about what would happen if the deal fell through. Then, on a Friday evening, 3 weeks after the initial letter, Rebecca called with the final terms.
"They accepted," she said, and Ethan could hear the satisfaction in her voice. 5% royalty, minimum guarantee of $250,000 annually for 5 years, with an option to renegotiate terms after that period. They'll also restore your original salary and position with back pay for the period you were reduced. Ethan did the mental math. Even at the minimum guarantee, he was looking at $1.25 million over 5 years, plus his restored salary and back pay. If StreamCore continued to grow as projected, the royalties could be much higher. "There's one more thing," Rebecca added. "They want you to sign a non-disparagement agreement. You can't talk publicly about the settlement or make negative statements about the company." "Can I talk about standing up for intellectual property rights in general terms?" "Yes, you just can't specifically trash Meridian or discuss the dollar amounts. Can you live with that?" Ethan thought about Sarah and Marcus and all the others who were still fighting their own battles. "As long as I can encourage other people to document their work and know their rights." "That's not covered by the non-disparagement clause." "Then we have a deal."
When Ethan Cole's salary was slashed from $120,000 to $45,000, he could have accepted defeat like countless other tech workers before him. Instead, he fought back, and in doing so, sparked a movement that would reshape how technology companies value their employees. Ethan's battle began with meticulous documentation. He had developed StreamCore, a data processing algorithm, entirely on his own time using his own resources. When Meridian Technologies implemented it across their product line and generated millions in revenue, Ethan refused to let his contribution go uncompensated. Armed with time-stamped commits, development logs, and clear evidence of independent creation, he hired attorney Rebecca Ortiz and filed an intellectual property claim. The result was a licensing agreement that entitled Ethan to 5% of StreamCore's revenue, a deal that would eventually generate $2.8 million and counting. But the financial victory, significant as it was, proved to be only the beginning of something far larger. Despite non-disclosure agreements and corporate efforts at containment, word of Ethan's success leaked through Meridian Technologies. The details became distorted through office gossip, but the core truth remained undeniable. An employee had challenged the company and won. That simple fact changed everything. Sarah Martinez approached Ethan first. She had spent 3 years developing a quality assurance framework as a side project before bringing it to Meridian, where it was implemented across all products. Inspired by Ethan's success, she began gathering her documentation. Ethan connected her with Rebecca Ortiz and taught her the fundamental principle he'd learned. Document everything, understand your rights, and don't be afraid to stand up for fair treatment. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you're enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Marcus followed with an even stronger case. His machine learning model for predictive maintenance, developed over 18 months using his own time and resources, had become integral to Meridian's IoT product line. With meticulous records, development logs, GitHub commits, even receipts for server time, Marcus pursued his own claim. Within weeks, he secured his own licensing deal. The wave had begun. 3 more employees reached out to Ethan asking about documentation strategies and legal representation. Ethan found himself conducting impromptu seminars during lunch breaks, teaching colleagues about intellectual property law and the crucial distinction between work for hire and independent creation. Meridian's response was predictable and severe. CFO Douglas Thompson issued a draconian new intellectual property policy requiring employees to disclose any technology-related project, even those created on personal time with personal resources. The policy was a transparent attempt to claim ownership of employees' thoughts and creativity. The backlash was immediate and fierce, but it was about to become much louder. When a TechCrunch reporter reached out about intellectual property disputes at Meridian, Ethan couldn't discuss his specific case due to his non-disparagement agreement. However, he could, and did, speak about the broader issue of how tech companies systematically undervalued employees while profiting from their innovations. The article went viral. Within days, tech workers across the industry were sharing their own stories of exploitation. Labor organizers held information sessions about intellectual property rights. 3 major tech companies announced they were reviewing their IP policies in response to employee feedback. Ethan had unintentionally become the face of a movement. Ethan's growing platform included a popular podcast interview where he emphasized that companies rely on employees not knowing their rights. His message was simple but powerful. Document your work, understand the law, and recognize your value. The episode was downloaded 50,000 times in its first week.
But the most meaningful impact remained local and personal. Marcus successfully negotiated his licensing deal. Sarah's case moved forward with Rebecca's help. 2 more Meridian employees filed claims, and the company settled both quickly and quietly. The culture inside Meridian began to shift as executives realized their technical staff might have legal recourse if undervalued. When Ethan's first royalty check arrived, $67,000 for a single quarter, he paid off his student loans and bought a whiteboard to map out new projects. 6 months after the licensing agreement, he left Meridian on his own terms, with his royalty rights fully protected. His next career move surprised everyone. Rather than joining another large tech company, Ethan started consulting independently, helping startups and smaller companies build efficient systems while maintaining ethical employee relationships. His first client was a healthcare startup whose founder wanted to avoid the mistakes of bigger companies. Ethan helped them implement technology while drafting IP agreements that were fair, clear, and respectful of individual contributions. The work that gave Ethan the most satisfaction was volunteer teaching. He partnered with a local community college to teach a night course on intellectual property rights for tech workers. His message to students was clear. Most would never need to file an IP claim, but all needed to understand their rights, document their work, and recognize their value. One student, Keisha Washington, came to office hours with a familiar story. A security protocol she developed on her own time had been implemented across her employer's entire platform while she remained severely underpaid. With Ethan's guidance and Rebecca's legal expertise, Keisha filed a claim and settled within a month. It was a smaller agreement than Ethan's, but substantial enough to change her life and prove the system could work for others. One person standing up is brave, Ethan told his students. 100 people knowing they can stand up is a movement. A year after leaving Meridian, Ethan spoke at a major tech industry conference on fair compensation models. He expected a modest turnout. Instead, the room was packed beyond capacity, with standing room only and overflow into adjacent spaces. Hundreds of people, developers, designers, managers, HR professionals, startup founders, came to hear his story. His message remained consistent. Most tech workers have more power than they realize. Companies rely on employees not knowing their rights, not documenting their work, and not being willing to fight back. But when workers do those things, they can win. The question and answer session revealed deep frustrations across the industry. People wanted documentation strategies, legal guidance, and negotiation tactics. One woman expressed the fear many felt. What if I lose my job? I have kids, a mortgage. Ethan's response was honest. Companies that treat you badly once will likely treat you badly again. Staying in a situation where you're undervalued isn't safe. It's just a slower form of harm. 2 years after the licensing deal, Ethan received an unexpected email from Douglas Thompson requesting a meeting. The former CFO wanted to apologize, not as a corporate representative, but as one person to another. Thompson had left Meridian and taken a position at a smaller company trying to implement the lessons Ethan's case had taught him. Fair equity splits, transparent compensation, and IP agreements that respected employee contributions. The ironic thing, Thompson admitted, is that treating people fairly is actually better for business. Turnover dropped, innovation increased. The settlements were expensive, but not as expensive as losing institutional knowledge. The conversation represented something Ethan hadn't expected: genuine systemic change. If even Douglas Thompson could learn and evolve, perhaps the industry could too. 3 years after the licensing deal, Ethan's quarterly royalty checks had grown substantially as StreamCore expanded internationally. The total had surpassed $2.8 million. But the numbers weren't what mattered most. What mattered was the 23 people from his community college class who'd successfully negotiated better compensation or licensing deals. What mattered was Marcus's company, now employing 40 people with exceptional treatment and profit sharing from day one. What mattered was Sarah's successful QA consultancy, built on the framework she owned. What mattered was the changed conversation around employee rights in the tech industry. Ethan's consulting practice grew into a substantial firm with 2 associates, both former students. Companies actively sought them out, wanting technical expertise combined with ethical employee relationships.
His clients included startups founded by women who'd left major tech companies after compensation disputes, determined to prove success and ethics weren't mutually exclusive. 5 years after the licensing deal, Ethan was invited back to Meridian, not to work, but to speak at their annual company meeting. New CEO Jennifer Park wanted to acknowledge past mistakes and demonstrate the company's commitment to change. Ethan was honest about the pain of his experience, but also about what he'd learned. Standing up for yourself is hard but necessary. Documentation matters, and individual actions can spark broader change. Park outlined specific reforms, revised IP policies, transparent compensation, profit sharing for major technical contributions, and an ombudsman system for fair treatment concerns.
One young developer thanked Ethan for making the workplace better before they'd even arrived. Their offer letter included IP protections and fair compensation guidelines, direct results of Ethan's battle years earlier. That evening, at their annual dinner tradition, Sarah asked Ethan if he ever regretted the fight. His answer was unequivocal. No. It was hard, and there were moments I wasn't sure I'd survive it financially or emotionally, but it was necessary. We proved that people have power when they're willing to use it, that companies will change when the cost of not changing becomes too high, and that individual courage can spark collective transformation. Ethan's story began with a devastating salary cut and a choice: accept devaluation quietly or fight back with documentation, legal rights, and conviction. That choice led to millions in licensing fees, but more importantly, it led to changed lives, reformed policies, and a fundamental shift in how people thought about their relationship with employers. The lesson he learned and now taught others remained simple but powerful. Your work has value. Your rights matter, and you don't have to accept being treated as disposable. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to be devalued, standing up for what you created, and trusting that truth, carefully documented and courageously defended, will prevail. Somewhere, someone was reading an email that would change their life. Somewhere, someone was deciding whether to accept mistreatment or fight back. Ethan hoped they would choose courage, document their work, and stand up, because he had, and it had made all the difference.